Hello and welcome to the Ruslan Belov channel. Today we'll be discussing the global situation as of June 17th, 2025. A tremendous number of very interesting events have occurred. So let's get started. Today, of course, we'll be covering the massive missile and drone strikes on the capital of Ukraine, the city of Kyiv. We'll also discuss the news that the President of the United States is expected to soon provide Israel with specialized bunker-busting bombs designed to destroy infrastructure located deep underground. And without a doubt, we'll touch on perhaps the most intriguing piece of news. In the near future, North Korea is expected to send another contingent to the Russian Federation, a group consisting of 6,000 personnel, including 1,000 engineers and 5,000 workers, to support infrastructure efforts. We'll break that down in more detail in the next few minutes. So, let's begin, and we'll start with Iran. Just a few words. Today we've received reports that more and more US and NATO forces are being concentrated around Iran. We're talking about aircraft, refueling planes, and of course aircraft carriers. There are currently at least 3 or 4 aircraft carriers in the region that may potentially take part in future combat operations against Iran. Primarily, this likely concerns a facility located just south of Iran's capital, Tehran. But there are several important points and nuances here. If we analyze the weaponry currently at Israel's disposal, it becomes clear that Israel does not have aircraft capable of carrying these specialized bunker-busting bombs. Right now, only a few, perhaps just one or several, aircraft in the world can deploy such bombs. And primarily, we're talking about the US B-2 bombers, which by the way have already been deployed in large numbers at an American base in the Indian Ocean. These planes will most likely be used by the United States to strike Iranian underground bunkers and nuclear infrastructure. Naturally, these developments raise several important questions, primarily to Iran. And the biggest question I would ask the Iranian leadership is, where are your Russian Su-35s? Let me remind you that in 2024, negotiations were underway between the Russian Federation and Iran regarding the sale of Su-35 fighter jets to Iran. According to open-source information, at least 2 Su-35s had been delivered to Iran by November 2024. Of course, 2 Su-35s wouldn't change the overall situation and couldn't do much against Israeli, US, or NATO aircraft. But that was only a small part of the broader deal. Later, in January 2025, it was reported that the deal between Iran and the Russian Federation had been finalized. Based on open-source data and various insider reports and rumors, possibly from people familiar with the deal, Iran may currently possess anywhere from 2 to 50 Su-35 units. Let me remind you, these are 4++ generation aircraft, and they are potentially capable of challenging Israeli and American jets over Iran, especially when supported by air defense systems and suitable missiles. The Russian Federation has missiles capable of hitting targets at a distance of 300 kilometers. So the key question remains, where are they? It appears that Iran's leadership is holding on to these aircraft for a special occasion. But if we look at what's been happening since the start of the recent hostilities, several surveillance footage clips have been released in recent days showing Israeli forces destroying Iranian aircraft. But those were F-14. Since the beginning of the conflict, there hasn't been a single confirmed report of Iran losing a Su-35. So where are they? They're being kept somewhere by Iran, clearly waiting for the right moment. And perhaps, when the B-2 bombers, covered by NATO and Israeli aircraft, attempt to break through to Iran's nuclear facilities and deliver those specialized bombs, that could be the moment the Russian Su-35s finally appear in the skies. We'll be watching closely. In any case, if this is going to happen, it won't be a year or two from now. It should happen within the next week or two. The upcoming week or two will be critical, and we may witness Su-35s confronting NATO standard aircraft. Now let's return to the territory of Ukraine. Today's main updates come from the capital, Kyiv. The Russian Federation has launched a massive strike using missiles and drones. Ukrainian sources from the Ministry of Defense report that over the past 24 hours, at least 472 aerial targets, drones, and both cruise and ballistic missiles were used by the Russian side. Ukrainian sources claim that during the night battle, They managed to shoot down at least 402 out of 440 drones launched. They also report nearly all missiles were intercepted. However, if we refer to surveillance footage, we can clearly see a picture that directly contradicts the official Ukrainian reports. For example, in this footage, we can see what is most likely a strike, either by a missile or a drone, most likely a missile, with a cluster warhead in the area of the Zuliani airfield. This is precisely the location where the Ukrainian side has stationed its air defense systems. As a result of the strike, it's possible that several Patriot air defense systems were damaged, or perhaps even destroyed. Here's another piece of footage showing a Russian cruise missile in flight. We can observe it deploying decoy flares, and we can also see what might be the operation of Ukrainian air defense systems. Overall, if we analyze the thermal anomalies, which are available from open-source data, it appears that the Russian side conducted strikes on the northwestern, southwestern, and southeastern parts of Kyiv. And since early morning today, residents of Kyiv have been witnessing the following scene. Huge columns of black smoke rising over the city and spreading across the entire capital. Based on this surveillance footage, it appears that a very large depot was destroyed, possibly a storage site containing Western weaponry, or missiles, or something else. But in any case, some Ukrainian unit or group on the front line will not be receiving whatever was in that depot. Next, we move to the line of contact. We begin with the Sumy sector of the front. Today, we received very interesting news from this direction. Shoigu made several statements today. Over the past months, he has visited North Korea multiple times, where he conducted negotiations with Kim Jong-un. According to Shoigu, in the near future, Pyongyang will provide the Russian Federation with 6,000 troops, 1,000 of whom will be combat engineers tasked with demining operations in the Kursk region, and 5,000 will be from engineering and construction units, possibly to assist in reconstruction efforts in the same region. This is the official position presented today by Russian authorities. But if you ask for my opinion, I would like to offer a slightly different perspective. And if you ask me, I believe the Russian Federation may use these North Korean units in a different way. However, let me clarify, not as assault troops. A very interesting article was recently published by Western analysts, stating that by early 2025, the Russian Federation had drastically reduced the number of armored attacks. In fact, such tactics have become outdated. Assaults involving armored columns, with tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and APCs, are no longer used. No matter how many layers of improvised armor you attach to this equipment, even if you wrap it 10 times over, it doesn't work anymore. Because no matter how you reinforce it, a single drone can destroy a single tank. One drone, one tank. The target is obvious. From an economic perspective, this is simply ineffective. If Russia launches an assault involving armor, almost all the vehicles are destroyed 5 kilometers before they even reach the line of contact. In simple terms, the vehicles never make it to the front. They're detected as soon as a tank column starts moving, a few tanks followed by a couple of IFVs, and immediately drones are launched against them. They are destroyed while still in Russian-controlled territory. Because of this, the Russian side began changing its tactics as early as 2024. Today, any Russian offensive is a combination of infantry, artillery, and FPV drone operators moving in small groups of 5 to 7 people with 5 to 7 meters of spacing between them. This presents a major problem for Ukrainian FPV drone operators, who simply can't engage targets the way they could before. In the past, one tank with 7 troops riding on top was a perfect jackpot for one drone strike. Now, instead of one tank, there are 7 infantrymen spread out over a distance of several meters. Now, to strike them all, you'd need 7 drones, and that's assuming 100% accuracy for each strike. In reality, it may take 14 drones or even 100. As a result, the Ukrainian side is currently suffering losses and retreating along the entire front line because they have not yet managed to organize a stable defense. This has both positive and negative implications for both Russia and Ukraine. But the main downside for Russia in this tactic is that while it works, the troops move forward, villages are captured, settlements are cleared. There's no talk of taking major cities. At the same time, the pace of the offensive is extremely slow. Even though it was reported that in May 2025, Russia achieved its best territorial advance since late 2022, the overall picture remains unchanged. At this rate, even reaching the Dnipro River could take decades. Russia clearly understands that despite small localized advances using infantry, major breakthroughs can only be achieved with armored forces. And this raises the question, how do you get that armor to the front line without it being destroyed in places like Sumy Oblast, for example, during an offensive toward Oktyrka or Konotop? How do you achieve that? This is likely the reason for deploying North Korean units. They will be actively involved in demining and, apparently, in constructing extensive defensive networks. From the settlements of Sudja, or perhaps Koronevo, or even Rilsk, they'll build massive structures, pillars, roads, and routes covered with camouflage netting, which will allow for safe and uninterrupted movement of Russian military vehicles, not only within Russian-controlled territory, but also help secure routes from remote mining and drone-based mine-laying. 1,000 of them will handle mine-clearing operations, while the other 5,000 will follow behind the infantry and armor to rapidly construct these corridors and supply routes, which could potentially enable faster, more effective Russian offensives involving heavy equipment, because the city of Sumy is no longer that far away. But how do you conduct urban warfare in Sumy if your armor can't even reach the outskirts because it gets destroyed by drones? Now let's turn to the situation on the ground. According to some, mostly pro-Russian cartographers, over the past 24 hours, Russian forces have made significant advances in Sumy Oblast toward the city of Sumy. Today, some cartographers report that Russian troops have entered the village of Mala Korchakovka. There are also reports of progress in the fields south of the settlement of Vorochina. In addition, Ukrainian cartographers from the Deep State team report that Russian units have managed to gain a firm foothold along the H07 highway between Yunakivka and the city of Sumy. However, despite this progress, there have been no changes marked in Yunakivka itself, where Ukrainian forces are reportedly still offering fierce resistance. Interesting updates are coming from the settlement of Tetkino. Today the map has been updated, and it appears that Russian forces have nearly regained full control over this area. These images were published by Ukrainian forces from the 33rd Independent Assault Regiment. In the footage, we can see Ukrainian units launching strikes with various equipment, drones and aircraft on Russian forward positions in Tetkino. This video captured several incidents. One strike hit the southeastern part, another the southwestern, several more in the southern and central areas. Based on this footage released by the 33rd Assault Regiment, we updated the map to reflect Russian control in the southwestern part, and it appears that Tetkino is now nearly fully cleared by Russian forces. Next, we move to the Kupiansk direction. Today, the main activity is taking place all along the Kupiansk line, along the entire Oskil River. The Russian army is carrying out gradual strikes with drones on the positions of the armed forces of Ukraine. They are using glide bombs, FABS. They are using drones. An unprecedented amount of pressure is being placed on Ukrainian forces, though there are still no map updates along the front line. Then we move to the Siversk sector. And here, updates have begun. Very important ones. As you can see from the current map configuration, today we updated almost the entire eastern part of Serebryanka. Let me remind you that over the last few days, we've made about 10 updates. And if we look at the past week as a whole, a few days ago reports came in that Russian forces had broken through Ukrainian defenses on the Siversk front and entered the southeastern part of Serebryanka. However, we didn't mark any updates on the map at that time due to the lack of confirmation from credible sources. We simply noted the information and waited for verification. And immediately after that, day by day, the map began to change slowly in favor of the Russian armed forces. Yesterday, we made this particular update. Let me remind you, in that footage, we saw Russian motorcyclists trying to break into the eastern part of Serebryanka under heavy Ukrainian FPV drone fire. Based on that video, we updated the area west of Hrihorivka. Today, new footage confirmed the presence of Russian troops in eastern Serebryanka. This footage serves as primary confirmation that, as a result of decisive actions, Russian forces managed to enter Serebryanka, establish a foothold, and potentially form a stable bridgehead. At the moment, fierce battles are ongoing for Serebryanka. The Ukrainian side is attempting to counterattack because they clearly understand that the loss of Serebryanka is not just the loss of some small nameless village. It primarily poses a risk of encirclement for Ukrainian armed forces units located in the Serebryanka forestry area. We can already see how this pocket, this encirclement, is gradually forming. The loss of Serebryanka also opens up operational space and a path toward the northern outskirts of the town of Siversk. In the near future, we can expect a significant intensification of hostilities in this area. The Russian side has established full fire control over all roads leading towards Serebryanka. Any equipment, personnel, or reinforcements that the Ukrainian side attempts to send to stabilize the front line are being destroyed. But clearly, something isn't going according to plan. Next, we move on to the Kostiantynivka direction. Today, the main events are unfolding in the southeastern part, along the Siversky-Donets-Donbass Canal. Ukrainian sources have published footage just north of the settlement of Yuzhno-Dilayevka. In this footage, we can observe a series of FPV drone strikes on positions of the Russian army. Apparently, the targets were not regular troops, but rather elements of Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups. This particular episode is especially important. According to the author of the video, the strike was carried out in the northern part of this small reservoir. That means, according to their report, Russian units or saboteurs were located at this position. It can be assumed that in recent days, Russian forces attempted to advance from the direction of Azaryanivka through forest belts toward these small lakes and reservoirs in order to cut off the Ukrainian group still holding this stronghold and Yuzhno-Dilayevka from railway-based supply lines. And based on this geolocation, it's likely the Russians succeeded. We can now see the formation of a small encirclement, possibly a pocket. In any case, we expect that in the near future, mapping updates from reliable sources will show that Ukrainian formations are withdrawing from this area to avoid full encirclement. Most likely this withdrawal will begin tonight, between June 17th and 18th, 2025. Now we move to the Pokrovsky direction. There is a lot of interesting news from this area today. Pro-Ukrainian map sources are marking the entire northern part of Hrodivka, indicating Russian advances between Hrodivka and Mirolyubivka, in the southeastern part of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. Certain pro-Russian experts report that the Russian army has managed to completely clear the network of fortified positions between Malinivka, Novotoretsky, and Mirolyubivka. These positions may be updated on the map soon. There are also geolocated confirmations of attempted attacks toward Kopytiv and further northwest in the direction of the settlement of Novotoretsky. So we may see additional map corrections in this area soon. Now we move on to the southern Donetsk direction, the Novopavlivka or Dnipropetrovsk axis. There is a lot of news from here. The most interesting is that the Russian army has gradually begun advancing through forest belts into the Dnipropetrovsk region. This is being reported by various more or less reliable pro-Russian sources. Strikes are being delivered against Ukrainian positions to the west. A clearing operation is underway. After each clearance, Russian units slowly advance and take over new forest belts. This is a very important development, as the Ukrainian side has not yet completed the evacuation from the corridor between Alexeyevka and Horokov. The continued Russian advance through the forest belts may force the Ukrainian side to take more urgent action due to the high risk of encirclement. In the southern Novopavlivka direction, there are reports that Russian units have entered the settlement of Zaporizhzhia. Surveillance footage shows Russian artillery targeting the central and western outskirts. We can see that the village has essentially been wiped off the map. Moreover, even pro-Ukrainian mapping services have updated their maps to reflect Russian control in the eastern part. This information was provided by neutral and pro-Ukrainian cartographers. According to them, the Russian army managed to enter the eastern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia and secure a foothold. Let's take a look and compare the maps for clarity. Just yesterday, the front line looked like this. Today we have reports confirming that Russian forces are holding the eastern outskirts. And that's all for now, dear friends. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and all the best to you.